The officer leaned back in his chair, a smug grin spreading across his face as the veteran approached the counter. The man in uniform, worn and confident from years of service, stood patiently, waiting to be acknowledged. His posture was upright, his eyes calm but sharp, carrying the quiet strength of someone who had seen more than most could imagine. Yet the officer behind the desk didn't see that. He didn't see a soldier who had sacrificed for his country, or a man who had given his youth to protect the very freedoms that allowed him to wear his badge. All he saw was another face he thought he could belittle, another target for his misplaced pride. The veteran spoke softly, his voice steady and respectful as he explained the reason for his visit. There was no trace of anger, no hint of impatience, only the discipline that years of military service had instilled in him. But the officer's smirk grew wider. He interrupted, throwing sarcastic remarks, questioning the veteran's story, mocking the tone of his voice. The people nearby shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension in the air. The veteran didn't raise his voice. He didn't glare. He simply waited, standing tall in the face of disrespect, his silence louder than any argument could ever be. For the officer, the laughter was easy. He thought his badge made him untouchable, that authority gave him the right to degrade others. He didn't know that the man standing in front of him had once commanded respect from generals and soldiers alike. He didn't know that this man had faced life and death with courage, that he had seen real battles, battles far beyond the small power games of an office desk. He didn't understand that disrespecting a man like that was more than rudeness, it was ignorance in its purest form. As the exchange went on, the room grew heavier. The veteran's calm presence began to unsettle those watching. His eyes didn't waver, his composure didn't break. Every breath he took seemed deliberate, grounded in years of self-control. It wasn't weakness, it was strength refined through discipline. That same discipline that taught him to act with honor, even when disrespected. That same discipline that reminded him that power isn't about raising your voice, it's about knowing when not to. The officer laughed again, louder this time, trying to draw attention to his performance. He cracked a joke under his breath, something about pretend heroes, and it was then that a shift happened, not in the veteran's stance, but in the energy of the room. People began to look at the officer differently. His arrogance wasn't confidence anymore, it was cruelty. And the veteran, though he hadn't spoken more than a few words, commanded more respect in his silence than the officer did with all his noise. Inside the veteran's mind, there was no anger. There was only understanding. He had seen men like this before, men who confused authority with worth, who believed uniforms made them powerful. He had learned long ago that true strength doesn't need to shout. True strength is built through patience, through enduring hardship without letting it harden the heart. So he waited. He let the officer reveal himself, word by word, smirk by smirk. He didn't fight disrespect with disrespect. He simply stood his ground, unshaken. The irony was that the very thing the officer mocked, the veteran's calm, his restraint, his quiet dignity, was the thing that made him powerful. Discipline had become his armor, patience his shield. Every insult that was thrown his way only bounced off. The veteran's silence wasn't submission, it was control. It was the discipline of a man who had learned that emotional reaction is what people like that feed on, and denying them that reaction is the ultimate victory. Moments like this reveal the true difference between arrogance and discipline. The officer's laughter came from insecurity, the veteran's calm came from confidence. One man tried to assert power through mockery, the other embodied it through composure. Every word that came out of the officer's mouth only exposed his weakness, while every moment the veteran stood still revealed his strength. It wasn't about rank or uniform anymore, it was about character. The officer didn't realize it, but his disrespect said more about him than it ever could about the man he mocked. Those watching saw it too. The veteran had no need to defend himself, because his presence alone told a story of sacrifice, honor, and resilience. The officer's behavior, on the other hand, showed his immaturity and lack of understanding of what true service means. The veteran represented everything the uniform should stand for: discipline, respect, and humility. The officer represented what happens when those values are lost. Even as the tension thickened, the veteran remained the picture of grace under fire. He had faced enemies who truly wanted to harm him, and this moment was nothing compared to that. He had endured worse pain, harsher words, and deeper wounds. The officer's disrespect couldn't touch him because he had already built a wall of discipline around his heart. It was that very discipline, the kind forged in the harshest conditions, that made him untouchable in moments like this. The veteran stood there, unshaken, a figure of quiet power wrapped in calm dignity. His uniform was no longer the camouflage of his military days, but the way he carried himself still reflected the same precision, the same discipline that once guided him through battlefields. Every movement was deliberate, every breath controlled. The police officer's laughter echoed through the room, but it didn't touch him. He had long learned that noise is temporary, that respect is not demanded, it's earned through the way one endures. His silence wasn't a sign of fear, it was the silence of a man who knew exactly who he was and what he stood for. People around the room began to notice something different about him. There was an energy in his stillness, an unspoken authority that couldn't be ignored. While the officer's mockery filled the air with arrogance, the veteran's composure brought balance. His eyes, steady and focused, seemed to see beyond the moment, beyond the insults, into something deeper. He had been through storms before, real ones, and he knew how to remain steady when others tried to provoke chaos. There was no anger, only the kind of patience that comes from years of discipline, the kind of strength that doesn't need to be proven with words. In his silence, there was memory. Memory of long nights spent in places where fear was real and danger constant. He remembered moments when the wrong move could mean the difference between life and death, where staying calm was not a choice but survival. That experience had carved something into his character, a form of strength that most people would never understand. So, standing in front of a man who thought laughter could humiliate him, he didn't flinch. He had faced greater threats than mockery. He had faced real enemies and walked away with honor intact. What could a few disrespectful words do to a man who had stared death in the face and kept his integrity? The veteran's silent strength was built from layers of experience, pain, and endurance. It was the kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, it simply exists, undeniable and steady. When he looked at the officer, he didn't see an enemy. He saw a young man blinded by ignorance, someone who didn't yet understand what service truly meant. The officer's arrogance reminded him of rookies he had once trained, those who mistook toughness for leadership, who thought barking orders made them strong. He had learned the hard way that real strength wasn't in shouting louder than others but in standing taller through adversity. Even the way the veteran stood told a story. Shoulders squared, eyes level, posture straight, it was a language of respect, of self-control, of pride in one's values. He had nothing to prove to anyone in that room. His very existence was proof of his courage, his loyalty, and his sacrifice. He had carried the weight of responsibility that only a soldier understands. The weight of watching brothers fall, of making hard choices, of living with memories that never fade. That kind of experience creates a different kind of power, one that can't be shaken by laughter or disrespect. The officer kept talking, trying to assert dominance, but the more he spoke, the smaller his presence became compared to the veteran's. The veteran didn't need to argue or correct him. His calmness made every insult seem childish, every attempt at humiliation look desperate. It was the kind of control that can't be taught, it's earned through discipline, forged through the fire of hardship. The veteran understood that real power doesn't come from control over others, it comes from control over yourself. As the tension lingered in the air, the veteran's presence began to shift the atmosphere. People started looking at him with a new sense of respect. His silence spoke louder than any defense could. It said, "I've fought real battles, this is nothing." The officer's confidence faltered, even if just for a second, because deep down he could feel it too, the difference between someone who wears authority and someone who is authority. The veteran didn't just wear his experiences, he embodied them. Inside the veteran's heart, there was peace. The kind of peace that only comes when you've already faced your worst fears and survived. He didn't need validation from anyone. He had already proven himself on grounds that demanded everything from him: his strength, his discipline, his loyalty. The uniform he once wore might have been folded away, but the values remained stitched into his soul. Every beat of his heart carried lessons of restraint, honor, and purpose. The officer's behavior could not shake that foundation. It was that silent strength, that deep inner calm, that began to expose the contrast between the two men. One was loud, insecure, seeking attention. The other was quiet, steady, commanding respect without saying a word. The veteran's stillness made the officer's noise look small. His patience revealed the emptiness behind the arrogance. It was a battle of presence, not power, a test of character, and only one man in that room understood what true strength looked like. The veteran had lived through moments that broke lesser men, and yet here he stood, composed, proud, untouched by petty disrespect. His strength was invisible yet undeniable, the kind that came from living a life of purpose, from enduring pain without letting it destroy his spirit. It wasn't the kind of strength you could see, it was the kind you could feel. His silence wasn't weakness. It was mastery over himself, the kind of mastery only those who have truly served and sacrificed could ever understand. The officer leaned forward with a smirk, his voice laced with mockery as he questioned the veteran's story. Every word dripped with the arrogance of someone who had never been truly tested. His tone wasn't just dismissive, it was condescending, as if the man standing before him was beneath his notice. This was the arrogance of authority, the kind that grows in the absence of humility. The officer believed his badge gave him power, that his position made him superior, that the respect of others was something to be demanded, not earned. He didn't realize that authority without character is nothing more than noise. The veteran, standing across from him, understood this better than anyone. He had worn a uniform too, one that required him to uphold values far beyond pride. He knew that real authority doesn't come from a symbol on your chest or the color of your uniform, it comes from the integrity behind it. But as he watched the officer's arrogance unfold, he saw what happens when a man forgets the weight of the responsibility that comes with power. The officer's laughter, his careless words, the way he talked down to someone who had served his country, all of it revealed how empty his sense of authority truly was. There is a certain blindness that comes with arrogance. The officer was so focused on asserting control that he failed to see who he was talking to. He didn't see the quiet discipline, the restrained strength, or the calm confidence that radiated from the veteran. Instead, he saw someone he could dominate, someone who wouldn't fight back, and that illusion fed his ego. His uniform had become his armor, not to protect justice, but to protect his insecurity. He thought power meant the ability to make others feel small, and so he used it like a weapon, not realizing that the more he used it that way, the weaker he appeared. The arrogance of authority often reveals itself in the smallest gestures, the way someone interrupts, the tone they use, the smirk they wear when they think they're untouchable. Every gesture from the officer carried that arrogance. He talked over the veteran, refused to listen, and when the veteran tried to speak calmly, he cut him off again, eager to remind him who was in charge. It wasn't confidence that drove him, it was fear disguised as control. The fear of being challenged, of being seen for what he truly was, a man who wore a badge but lacked the strength of character to live up to it. The people in the room could feel the tension building. The air grew thick with discomfort as the officer continued, unaware of how his behavior reflected on him. The veteran didn't respond with anger or defiance. He didn't need to. His silence was deliberate, his posture unchanging, his calmness a quiet act of defiance in itself. That composure only made the officer more irritated. He wanted a reaction. He wanted to prove his dominance by breaking the veteran's peace. But every second that passed without the veteran losing his temper was another reminder that control was never his to begin with. Arrogance thrives on reaction. It needs resistance to validate itself. The officer couldn't understand why his usual methods weren't working. Most people would have argued back by now, raised their voices, or backed down in embarrassment. But the veteran did none of those things. He simply watched, measured, waiting. There was something about his calm that unnerved the officer, a quiet strength that made his own power feel fragile. It wasn't supposed to feel like this. He was the one in uniform now. He was supposed to be in control. Yet somehow, he felt smaller with every passing moment. In his arrogance, the officer mistook silence for weakness. He believed that speaking louder made him right. He believed that belittling others would make him appear more important. But arrogance, by its nature, blinds a person to reality. The veteran's steady eyes reflected none of the fear or submission the officer expected. Instead, they held a kind of clarity, a mirror that showed the officer exactly what he was becoming. And that reflection was uncomfortable. The louder the officer spoke, the more he tried to assert control, the clearer it became to everyone that he had already lost it. True authority doesn't shout. It doesn't humiliate. It doesn't seek to prove itself. The veteran embodied that truth in every moment he stood there. His calm presence contrasted so sharply with the officer's arrogance that the difference between the two was impossible to ignore. One man had earned his authority through service, sacrifice, and self-discipline. The other clung to his title as if it were the only thing that made him worthy of respect. The contrast was painful to watch, because it exposed the hollowness behind arrogance, the emptiness of a man who confuses fear with respect. As the laughter faded, replaced by the uneasy quiet of those watching, the officer's arrogance began to feel out of place. The more he spoke, the less powerful he seemed. The veteran didn't need to say a single word to command attention. His silence, his patience, his refusal to engage in the same childish display of ego, all of it stripped away the illusion of the officer's authority. What stood before them wasn't a battle between two men, it was a lesson unfolding in real time, a lesson about what happens when arrogance replaces humility, when a badge becomes a mask, and when true authority meets the false confidence of a man who never learned the meaning of respect. The officer's laughter still echoed faintly when the veteran reached into his pocket, calm and deliberate. There was no rush in his movement, no sign of agitation. His fingers brushed the screen of his phone, and with a quiet confidence, he began to dial a number. The room, which moments ago had been filled with arrogance and mockery, started to shift. The rhythm of the veteran's actions drew attention. Every movement carried weight, and though he didn't raise his voice or demand anything, there was something about his calmness that demanded silence. The officer watched, still wearing that half-smirk, unaware that his world was about to tilt in an entirely different direction. The phone rang only once before a voice answered on the other end. It was firm, commanding, and filled with authority that didn't need to be announced. The veteran's tone remained respectful but steady, addressing the person on the line with the kind of ease that comes from long-standing respect. The officer's posture began to stiffen slightly. Something in that brief exchange didn't sound ordinary. The veteran mentioned his name, his service background, and a few familiar phrases, names and units that carried significance in circles far above the officer's understanding. Suddenly, the officer's laughter began to sound distant, irrelevant, even foolish. The veteran didn't have to explain much. A few quiet words were enough. The person on the other end knew exactly who he was speaking to. Years of service, acts of honor, and leadership that had left a mark on everyone who had served under or alongside this man, it all carried weight. The veteran wasn't just a soldier, he was someone whose name still commanded respect among the highest ranks. The officer, who moments ago thought he held power, was now realizing he had made a mistake far beyond his understanding. The call didn't last long. The veteran ended it as calmly as he had started, placing his phone back in his pocket with quiet composure. There was no dramatic flair, no raised voice, no threats. Just silence. That silence was heavier than any argument. The people watching felt the shift immediately. The officer's confidence faltered. He cleared his throat, trying to recover, but the certainty in his tone was gone. He suddenly seemed smaller, his authority fading like a shadow under the weight of truth. Moments later, the phone at the officer's desk rang. The sound cut through the air sharply, making everyone look up. The officer hesitated before answering, his earlier smirk replaced by nervous uncertainty. The voice on the other end was stern and unyielding. The color drained from his face as he listened. His tone changed instantly, stuttering words of apology, his arrogance evaporating as quickly as it had appeared. The quiet man he had mocked just minutes ago had, with one simple call, revealed a truth that humbled everyone in the room. The veteran didn't watch with gloating satisfaction. He stood quietly, hands at his sides, eyes steady. There was no need for revenge or pride. This wasn't about proving superiority, it was about exposing reality. The power that arrogance pretends to have had been stripped away by genuine respect and real authority. The officer finally understood that the man standing before him wasn't just another civilian. He was someone who had earned respect through a lifetime of service and sacrifice, someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. The atmosphere in the room changed completely. The same people who had been silent during the officer's mockery now looked at the veteran with admiration. The shift was almost tangible, the kind of energy that moves through a room when truth replaces pretense. The officer's earlier arrogance now looked childish, his authority hollow. The veteran hadn't done anything extraordinary, he had simply made a phone call. But that call was a symbol of something much deeper. It showed that true power doesn't need to be displayed, it reveals itself naturally when integrity meets respect. The officer lowered his eyes, his earlier confidence gone. Every word he had mocked, every gesture of disrespect, now echoed back at him with a weight he couldn't bear. He tried to apologize, his voice trembling slightly, but the veteran didn't react. His expression remained neutral, calm, almost compassionate. There was no anger in his demeanor, only quiet understanding. He had seen this kind of downfall before, the moment when arrogance collapses under the truth of genuine authority. The veteran didn't need to raise his voice or explain what had just happened. The entire room understood. That single call had revealed more about power and respect than any speech could. It wasn't the connection that mattered, it was the reason behind it. The veteran had earned that level of respect not through wealth, not through influence, but through character, through decades of selfless service, through integrity that left an impression on those who knew him. The officer's arrogance, once so loud, had vanished into silence. He stood there, struggling to regain composure, but the balance had shifted completely. The power dynamic was gone. What remained was the undeniable truth, that real authority isn't about who can shout the loudest, or who wears the badge. It's about the strength of one's name, the legacy of one's actions, and the respect one carries even in silence. That one phone call had done what words never could, it exposed the difference between temporary power and timeless respect. The air in the room was heavy, not with anger but with realization. The veteran stood there, unshaken and composed, his expression calm but firm. The chaos of a few moments ago had faded into silence, replaced by something far more powerful, the quiet authority that comes from integrity. It wasn't about the phone call anymore. It wasn't about who held the badge or who stood behind the counter. It was about something deeper, something the officer had never understood, the power of integrity. The kind of power that doesn't come from position, wealth, or influence, but from living a life rooted in truth and honor. The veteran didn't need to boast about his achievements or demand respect. His actions spoke for him. Every movement, every word, every controlled breath reflected a lifetime of discipline and moral strength. Integrity had shaped him through years of service, through trials that tested not just his courage but his character. He had faced moments where decisions weren't between right and wrong, they were between easy and honorable. And each time, he had chosen the harder path, the one that demanded sacrifice but preserved his principles. That is what gave his presence such weight. People could sense it without him ever needing to say it. Integrity has a way of making arrogance look small. The officer, who had once mocked the veteran, now stood visibly uneasy. The same badge that once gave him confidence now felt heavier on his chest. He had learned, painfully and publicly, that true respect can't be commanded by authority, it must be earned through character. The veteran's calm demeanor wasn't about control, it was about peace, the peace that comes from knowing who you are and standing by it no matter the circumstance. The officer had mistaken politeness for weakness, but integrity is never weakness. It is restraint born of strength. People who live with integrity carry a kind of silent strength that cannot be faked. It shows in the way they speak, in the patience they show when others would lose their temper, in the way they hold themselves even when disrespected. The veteran's composure was not an act, it was the natural posture of a man who had lived his life guided by principles. He had faced betrayal, injustice, and hardship before, but he never let those things define him. Integrity meant never lowering himself to the level of those who wronged him. It meant staying true to who he was, even when no one was watching. In that moment, his integrity became his greatest power. The officer's authority came from his badge, a symbol that could be given or taken away. The veteran's authority came from his character, something no one could ever strip from him. The contrast between them couldn't have been clearer. The veteran stood tall, not because he wanted to prove superiority, but because truth naturally stands firm. Lies and arrogance crumble when confronted with authenticity. The veteran didn't have to defend himself or his past, his life was his defense. His integrity was his shield. The people watching began to see it too. Respect doesn't always come with a title. Sometimes it comes from quiet strength, from the way a person carries themselves when treated unfairly. The veteran's silence spoke volumes. His patience, his composure, and the dignity with which he handled the entire situation were proof of a kind of moral courage that few people possess. He didn't retaliate, didn't humiliate, didn't gloat when the truth came out. That was the mark of true integrity, showing grace even when you have every reason not to. For the officer, this was a lesson written in humiliation, but for everyone else, it was a moment of awakening. They saw what integrity truly looked like, not as a word in a speech or a value written on a wall, but as a living example standing before them. The veteran's strength didn't come from his connections or his past, it came from his consistency. He had lived a life where his words matched his actions, where promises meant something, where respect was given to all, regardless of rank or status. That kind of consistency builds a foundation that can't be shaken by anyone's opinion or disrespect. Integrity isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It simply exists, steady, unwavering, and powerful. The officer's arrogance had relied on the illusion of control. The veteran's integrity relied on truth, and truth doesn't need validation. Even in silence, it commands recognition. The veteran's calm smile, the ease with which he stood after being mocked, showed everyone that integrity gives you peace that arrogance can never know. Peace that comes from knowing your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to respond. The officer's earlier laughter now felt distant, meaningless. The real power in that room belonged to the man who stayed true to himself. Integrity had given the veteran something untouchable, a sense of inner strength that no humiliation could destroy. It's the kind of strength that comes from doing the right thing even when it's hard, from standing firm in your values even when others mock you. The veteran didn't win through confrontation, he won through character. And in the quiet that followed, everyone understood that integrity doesn't just reveal true power, it is true power. The officer stood motionless now, his earlier confidence dissolved into awkward silence. Around him, the room felt different, heavier, quieter, as if everyone had come to realize what had just unfolded before their eyes. The veteran, who had endured mockery and disrespect with unwavering patience, remained exactly as he had been from the start, calm, composed, and dignified. The tables had turned, but he made no move to celebrate or gloat. He simply stood there, the picture of quiet authority, showing through his demeanor what words could never capture. Respect, he knew, is not demanded, it is earned. And in that moment, every person in the room understood that truth. Respect is one of those things that cannot be forced. It isn't granted because of a uniform, a title, or a symbol of power. It is born from the way one carries themselves, from the consistency of actions, and from the authenticity of character. The officer had believed that his position automatically entitled him to respect. The veteran had lived a life proving that respect is something deeper, something you build through years of integrity, sacrifice, and humility. The difference between them was clear: one relied on authority to feel respected, while the other had earned it through the way he lived. The veteran had spent a lifetime understanding what it meant to respect and to be respected. He had seen men from all backgrounds stand shoulder to shoulder in moments of danger, where respect wasn't determined by color, status, or title, it was earned through courage and reliability. He had learned that respect is not something you talk about, it's something you show. You show it by how you treat people, how you handle adversity, how you respond when others fail to treat you with the same dignity you give them. That kind of respect is unbreakable, because it comes from within. The officer, standing opposite him, was now learning that lesson the hard way. Moments earlier, he had laughed at the veteran, seeing him as powerless. Now, his arrogance had dissolved into embarrassment. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that the veteran's silence had never been submission, it had been strength. And now that strength had exposed his own weakness. Respect can't be taken by force, it can only be given freely. The veteran's quiet endurance had earned it from everyone in the room without him having to ask for it. What made the veteran's presence so powerful was his humility. Even when the truth had been revealed, even when the balance of power had shifted completely in his favor, he didn't use it to humiliate or punish. He didn't need to. His respect for himself and for others was too deeply ingrained to be tainted by revenge. He understood that real strength isn't about making others feel small, it's about maintaining your principles no matter the circumstance. The way he stood there, calm and steady, said everything that needed to be said. The officer had demanded respect through authority, the veteran had earned it through character. Respect earned is lasting, while respect forced is fleeting. The people in the room would remember this moment not because of the phone call, not because of the embarrassment that followed, but because of the way the veteran handled it all, with grace. His demeanor became a mirror for everyone present. They saw in him what true respect looks like. It's not about dominance, it's about dignity. It's about how a person carries themselves when no one else seems to recognize their worth, how they continue to uphold their values even when faced with disrespect. The veteran embodied that truth so naturally that words weren't necessary. Even those who had stayed quiet during the officer's mockery now felt a shift in themselves. They saw in the veteran a living reminder that respect doesn't depend on how others treat you, it depends on how you treat them. His composure, his restraint, his refusal to react out of pride or anger, all of it spoke louder than any confrontation could. He had every reason to lash out, to humiliate, to correct the injustice done to him, but he chose a higher path. And that choice earned him a level of respect no rank could ever command. The officer's lesson was painful but profound. In trying to assert dominance, he had lost respect. In remaining humble, the veteran had gained it from everyone. Respect, after all, is about authenticity. People can sense when it's real. They can see when someone carries themselves with honor, even in silence. The veteran didn't seek validation, but it came naturally because truth has a way of revealing itself without effort. His quiet confidence became an unspoken reminder that respect built on fear fades quickly, but respect built on integrity endures. As the room settled into silence, everyone's eyes lingered on the veteran. The energy he carried wasn't loud or demanding, it was steady, powerful, and deeply human. His respect was self-earned, not borrowed from anyone else's opinion. The officer, now humbled, began to understand that true respect is not about the badge or the authority it represents, it's about the person wearing it. The veteran's lesson was one that didn't need to be taught with anger or words, it was demonstrated through presence alone. That presence carried the weight of experience, humility, and unshakable honor, the kind of respect that cannot be given or taken away, only recognized.